In 1848, James W. Marshall discovered gold at Sutter's Mill in California. This discovery triggered the mass movement of 300,000 people to California in search of their fortunes. It ultimately changed the course of American history as the gold rush fueled global migration to the United States, brought California to statehood, and positively charged the United States economy. So what do the California gold rush of 1848 and today's world of global Bitcoin investment have in common? Well, both employ a type of mining and are highly tempting ways to seek your fortune. They're both also changing history. Bitcoin questions the very idea of what money has to be. But both of these movements are also complicated, costly, and aren't always worth the risk. Bitcoin, despite steady growth, has also seen its share of value drops over the years. Even so, digital cryptocurrency is of great interest to investors, professional and homegrown alike. Who doesn't like a new way to earn money? But as Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies have grown, so have the concerns around them. Originally designed to be separate from banks and governments, we're now seeing regulations put onto those who are trying to grow their digital currencies. Another threat looms as well, with a fair share of irony. Bitcoin, which has no physical form, may very well be a threat to our Earth's environment. What exactly is Bitcoin? Bitcoin is unlike traditional money because it doesn't involve governments or banks. This means it exists outside the many rules other currencies function under. It also means it's not officially underwritten by any government. Even so, its use continues to grow popularly, and even companies like PayPal and MasterCard are taking notice. So what is Bitcoin anyway? Technically, it's something called cryptocurrency, a form of digital money without a physical representation like dollars or typical coins. While people have been experimenting with ideas for digital money as far back as the 1980s, Bitcoin was born out of a white paper written back in 2008 by an unidentified author. The 2008 financial crisis in the United States was one of the driving forces behind this development, spurred out of mistrust of banks. With Bitcoin, money is based on computer networks and not managed by any federal powers or banks. In a way, it's a bit like storing your money in your mattress, if your mattress was made of ones and zeros. One of the biggest challenges facing the development of digital cash is what was called the double spend problem. It was a question of how to keep the same digital dollar from being copied and spent twice, like a form of digital counterfeiting. This was solved with the creation of the blockchain, which keeps a public record of who owns what Bitcoin and prevents double spend. Now, without banks or governments, how is Bitcoin created? New Bitcoins are entered into circulation through a process called mining. Now, you don't have to invest in mining technology to own cryptocurrency tokens. At this point, you can buy it outright or even trade or earn it. But mining is a critical part of the maintenance and development of the blockchain. Blockchain technology is maintained through a decentralized network of millions of computers around the world. These computers are programmed to solve complex math problems, a key aspect of Bitcoin mining. The Bitcoin network verifies the answers, and this is why Bitcoin can remain decentralized. Verification is done by many people around the globe, letting the network remain free of private or government regulation. Once miners have verified a block, which is 1 megabyte worth of Bitcoin transactions, those miners are eligible to be rewarded with a quantity of Bitcoins for themselves. Now, 1 megabyte's worth of transactions can be a few hundred or several thousand. It all depends on how much data the transactions take, and not everyone who verifies transactions will get paid. This 1 megabyte rule was set by Bitcoin's founder Satoshi Nakamoto. This was done so that there would be some digital scarcity because only a certain number of Bitcoins can be mined each year. It's a pretty controversial measure because some miners believe the block size should be increased to accommodate more data. This would effectively mean that the Bitcoin network could process and verify transactions more quickly. But there's a downside to mining we mentioned earlier, the impact it has on the Earth's environment, Bitcoin farming, and energy use. Currently, there are many environmental critics of Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies because of their energy use and subsequent pollution it causes. Cambridge Research claims that Bitcoin mining operations around the globe use energy at the rate of almost 120 terawatt hours per year, which is around 0.6% of global electricity consumption. This might not sound like much, but it means that Bitcoin has roughly the same carbon dioxide emissions as a country the size of Sweden. The average American home uses the same amount of energy in a month that it takes to complete a single Bitcoin transaction. This, to critics, is largely irresponsible, especially when a Visa transaction costs a tiny fraction of that energy use, and many people are concerned about the part carbon emissions play in climate change. Another factor is the location of Bitcoin mining farms or large collections of power-hungry servers. Because of the large amount of energy consumed, Bitcoin miners go looking for the cheapest sources of electricity. This has led to around 70% of Bitcoin farming taking place in China, with Russia and Iran not far behind. In China especially, the use of cheap electricity is impacting goals to curb carbon emissions. Approximately 7% of Bitcoin mining is done stateside, where it's more complicated to find cheap power. This has its unforeseen impacts as well, even when the electricity being used is greener. When Bitcoin mining took up shop in Plattsburgh, New York, it drove up the price of electricity for the city because it exhausted the allotted hydroelectric power that the city receives from the St. Lawrence dams. This forced the city to purchase more electricity at higher costs, and soon a moratorium was enacted on new Bitcoin mining operations. A greener future. Another interesting development happened this past May in Beijing, China, when their government enacted new rules around crypto. These changes took roughly half the world's Bitcoin miners offline, as well as the older equipment they were using. The changes are triggering what some call a migration of miners to new sources of energy, and, surprisingly, often these new sources are renewable energy. There is support for the possibilities that Bitcoin brings to the green movement, specifically that Bitcoin will be the force that drives a green currency revolution. Peter Van Valkenburg, who is the director of research at the Coin Center, a nonprofit focused on policy issues with cryptocurrency, argues that Bitcoin could drive the clean energy revolution. He believes that the system's economic incentives favor clean, renewable energy. His claims may have some truth to them. Enigma is a Bitcoin mining facility that strictly uses hydroelectric dams and geothermal power for their mining. The mayor of Miami, Francis Suarez, has welcomed mining Bitcoin with nuclear power in Florida. There are also places like Texas to find cheap electricity, which is fueled by subsidies toward wind power. Americans are investing in greener power sources, even if it's not as fast as some people would like. But not all miners are coming to the United States after leaving China. China's neighbor, Kazakhstan, is also now a booming location for Bitcoin mining. Their share of the global Bitcoin mining market is very close behind the United States at 8%. It's easy enough to see why. Kazakhstan has an abundance of coal mines to fuel cheap energy. But this isn't the greenest solution. It may also not be the longest lasting. This is because some people think that Kazakhstan is just a holdover point in the mass migration of Bitcoin farming operations. As the older equipment many farms use becomes obsolete, it's speculated that miners will continue migrating towards cheap, clean energy, especially after 2022 when a new law signed by Kazakhstan's president begins to tax crypto miners. Mike Collier, CEO of digital currency company Foundry, claims that miners around the world are looking for stranded power that is renewable, that will always be your lowest cost. Net, this will be a big win for Bitcoin's carbon footprint. Ria Batoria, former director of research for Fidelity Digital Assets, was quoted as saying, "Miners need to constantly reduce their electricity costs, which is the number one expense, to be competitive." But like Bitcoin's value, much of this remains speculative. Will crypto go green, or will the search for the cheapest sources of power win out in the form of carbon emissions? Ultimately, only time will tell, but we can all hope that the digital grass is indeed greener on the other side.